During World War One, the German army at first made some spectacular advances. Its victories on the Eastern Front were swift against Russia. It conquered Poland very quickly. And it beat the Russians back, and it advanced into France and got within 30 miles of Paris. And a hero cult emerged around General Hindenburg. And outside Paris, in the Battle of the Marne, the Allies had a miracle victory and managed to push the Germans back, and thus started the trench warfare that we all know as World War One. And this came as a great shock to many Germans back home. World War One was a period when the term propaganda was used more and more, and it was used as a kind of neutral term because it was a total war. Morale and propaganda were really important, and so lots of government and army press agencies were trying to work out how much of the truth to tell people back home, because they wanted to keep morale high. They wanted to boost morale, and they would big up victories and they would downplay losses. Patriotism was very important. So back home in Germany, there was a huge enthusiasm for the war, almost all the way through. And towards the end of the war, Hindenburg and Ludendorff went to the Kaiser and said, "We've been defeated. It hasn't happened on the battlefield yet, but our supply lines have been cut. They've outresourced us. It's only a matter of time. We need to sue for peace now. It's over." So the Kaiser did so. This was a huge shock to the German people. And of course, Germany kind of descended quickly into a chaos, almost a civil war, as socialists and communists took over in some cities, and they were fought by conservative forces, and in the end the Weimar Republic was established, which obviously had a lot of issues. It had to pay harsh terms under the Versailles Treaty to the Allies, hyperinflation, and the Great Depression happened later on. There was also a lot of kind of avant-garde art and jazz that conservatives didn't like. And in this environment, a myth developed that Germany was stabbed in the back. That the Weimar Republic, the socialists and the liberals, had stabbed the army and the conservatives in the back, and that actually the Germans were winning the war and they were forced to withdraw on false pretenses. And in Mein Kampf, Hitler talks about this, and he says that the Jews used this big lie to blame Ludendorff for the failures of World War One. And this stab in the back myth was so dominant throughout the 20s, and huge, very numerous veteran groups, paramilitary groups developed around it, which basically became the base foundation of the Nazi Party. But Hitler came up with this term, the big lie. And he said, if you tell this lie over and over again, this lie, the Jews were lying about Ludendorff, then people would come to believe it. But the irony of the big lie is that there's a double lie in there. Did Hitler really believe that? The double lie is that you claim your opponents are lying while you yourself tell a lie for political purposes. They're fake news. Listen to what I'm saying. The strange thing about this, the worst thing about this, is that Hindenburg and Ludendorff both knew the stab in the back story going around was a lie, because they were the ones that were leading the army, but they influenced and propagated it nonetheless. And this kind of context environment gave rise to the popularity in certain authoritarian philosophies too. Carl Schmitt, his idea of authoritarianism was very much developed in the context of Weimar democracy as a response to it, because it was a horrible, lying, frivolous talking shop. Lying about history in this way is really part of the dictator's handbook. It happens over and over again. And it happens in democracies too, but, you know, Stalin included himself in textbooks and histories of the Soviet Union and placed himself in roles that he had no real part in. But there's also this lie about national pride. There's a history in Japan of downplaying the Nanjing massacres during World War II, and you know, this is done in the service of national pride, keeping up, buoying up national sentiment and feeling. British colonial history is a bit of a battleground at the moment. Conservatives don't like to admit certain things about the British Empire. I'm fascinated by lying in history and lying about history, because I think history is like a mirror maze. You know, it's contorted, it's at different angles, and when you sprinkle in facts and evidence and you adjust things with reason and data and evidence, you move the mirrors and you get them straight, and you can see then where you're going. And if you don't do that, everything's distorted, and what happens, you turn corners and you bump into things. You know, knowing what's happened in the past is essential to knowing where you're going. Think about walking through the woods, say. If you were looking at a map and had no conception of where you'd come from, you'd have no idea where you were going. This kind of stuff is key to the philosophy of history. But I think one of the reasons dictators and authoritarians like to lie about history so much is that it's an inefficient type of regime, government system, political system. And so that when inefficiencies become apparent, when people are disgruntled, there's a need to buoy up national sentiment and national pride. You can see this with Mussolini. You can see it with Putin. You can see it with Stalin. Happened a lot with Mussolini. He'd do well in certain areas for a while. People loved him. I think Gandhi loved Mussolini at first. Lots of Americans and lots of Brits liked Mussolini. But when he ran out of things to do, when he came up against a war, because there's no alternatives, because you can't switch parties or anything quickly, all that's left to do is bolster a sense of optimism and pride in a different way by saying, like, we're great, we're a bold, strong nation, we're better than them, we're going to do this. You sell a feeling. And that's what dictators are really good at. And there's a lot of this at the moment, this idea of like national pride and whitewashing the past. And we do ourselves down too much in the West. We moan about ourselves, we criticise ourselves too much. But that's the key to growth, to know your weaknesses, to know where you've gone wrong, and to address them and not to whitewash them. Because otherwise you end up in that mirror maze. You end up just bumping into a mirror that you've bumped into many times in the past. You don't understand the layout of the world. You don't understand where you're going. And so we need very good philosophies of truth and philosophies of history. We need to think carefully about how history informs the present. And I don't think we have good philosophies of history. We think of history as something back there, out there, dusty and gone. And I think history is much more about introspection in an academic or scholarly sense to find the truth about what we've done so we can better illuminate the future. If you want to know more about that kind of thing, it's something I'm really interested in. I've got a video on the main channel about using history like a weapon. And I've got a kind of a course, I hesitate to use that word, but on Patreon for Patreon supporters, which is the only way I'm able to do all this stuff, to help. This is the only way the main channel survives. And it's like a 2-hour course on thinking differently about history, on how we can use history better in the present. And it's stuff that I, learned at university, and it's stuff I've read since, and it's really grounded in thorough, lots of up-to-date academic research that it references. And it goes from the basics of like, what is objectivity in history, what is truth in history, what's relative in history, how does history affect us? And I'd like to do more of it. So if you want to watch that, you can do so on Patreon. I'll leave the link below, and you'd be supporting all of this at the same time. Thank you. See you next time.